Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast. My name is Joey Schultz and I'm joined as always by my fantastic co-hosts. First up, the guy whose companion cost is that his deck cannot contain any black cards. It's Matt Morgan.
Joey, I was attacked by 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. You might say the odds were against me.
They certainly were, Matt. And also, this is my subtle message that you should play more cards with black cards in them because those decks are so much fun.
Don't get your hopes up.
Well, you, Mr. Selesnya. Next, the guy who kicks planes symbols harder than the art of the new Narset card. It's Dana Roach.
I just read that the rules for Mutate are going to be on the SATs this spring. So, good luck, high school seniors.
Oh, my goodness, that really caught me off guard. I absolutely adore that. Anyway, this is the EDHRECast. EDHREC is the best deck building resource on the web for the Commander format, compiling data from deck lists all over the internet to provide helpful recommendations for new Commander decks. And here on the podcast, what we like to do is give all that data a little more context. Hey, Matt. What is our topic this week?
This week, we are going to talk about Ikoria proper. We're going to do our set review now.
That we are. We talked about the commanders on the previous week, and now we're looking at the cards from Ikoria. But before we get there, I do want to make a quick disclaimer. We're only going to be talking about the non-companion cards in this particular set. We want to do the companions and sort of a focus on them in a separate section. So that will be a different episode. It might be out before this episode. It might be out after, but it will be something separate. So we're just going to go through the non-companion stuff. And before we actually get started, we also want to, of course, give a huge thank you, a huge shout out to Josh Lequai and the whole team at the Command Zone who are handling all the post-production work on the podcast, making it look as good as it possibly can. And of course, a thank you to our sponsors, Card Kingdom and TCG Player, who provide the up-to-date price information for the card images on EDHREC. We're still not quite sure where their operations will be by the time that this particular episode airs, since we do record these a bit in advance to make sure that the Command Zone can make it all look as good as possible. But once everything does settle, we really, really highly recommend sending Card Kingdom and TCG Player some business because their services really are just so great. And if you do end up using Card Kingdom, you can go to cardkingdom.com/EDHREC to let them know that we sent you. All right, guys, I really want to just get right into this because there are so many cards to talk about in this set. That's actually why we had to separate the companions into a separate thing, because there's so much happening here. So many legends, so many new cards, and we're going to start off with the new wedge-colored mutating legends. There's a whole bunch of them, from Brokos, Apex of Forever, to Illuna, Apex of Wishes, to Nethroi. There's a whole bunch of new ones, and just evaluating all 5 of these new legendary creatures, Matt, tell us which ones really stand out to you.
So the ones that really stand out to me, Joe, you say I need to play more black cards. I'm going to say that Nethroi, Apex of Death, is probably the most insane mutate commander of all of them there. So I'm just going to read it. So it is 2 in Abzan colors, which is a white, a black, and a green for a 5/5 legendary Cat Nightmare Beast. This is where the dartboards came into play when they picked the creature types for all the creatures. But Nethroi, Apex of Death, has Mutate, which is 4 and then a Selesnya hybrid, black, where you can put this onto or under a other creature and it mutates. Nethroi has Death Touch and Lifelink, and whenever this creature mutates, return any number of target creature cards with total power 10 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. Reanimators, Necromancers, Friends of all dead places, eat your hearts out.
So, Matt, I'm actually going to let you know that you misread this card. You can use it if you want to get back a bunch of 0 power or 1 power 2. Like, you can get a bunch of creatures back with it if you want. You know, getting back stuff like a Colonian Hydra and a Gave Guru of Spores and a Rayhan Last of the Obzon sounds really cool because that doesn't take up any of the 10 power quota here. But you still misread this card. What this card actually says is you pay 7 mana as long as you have a creature spell in play so that you can cast this spell, and then you win the game because you bring everything out of your graveyard, and that's probably so much value that no one else can keep up with it. So it's actually just a 7 mana win the game spell right out of your
See, I'm still not used to playing black cards, so that is my fault for being a neophyte in the dark arts. 7 mana seems like a lot, but then apparently if you win the game, then that kind of seems swell. So
Well, and that's just it. Like, this thing is so powerful. This effect is absolutely so crazy, getting this big of an ability right out of the command zone, that playing a Buried Alive can easily set you into some type of maybe Micaeus and Triskelion famous combo, or some type of Protean Hulk or Boon Weaver combo shenanigans. You can Hermit Druid into just a direct victory by spilling everything from your graveyard into play. This deck seems absolutely crazy. And of all of the mutates, all of the mutant things that we're going to talk about here, all of these wedge ones, this is probably the only one that might even show up in non-dedicated mutate decks. It can just show up in obs on lists. That's how crazy this thing is. Like if you throw this into a Doran deck, for example, almost all of the creatures in that deck have 0 power. So this is just really good to get your entire field of defenders back into that deck list too. Like it's absolutely nutso.
So what I'm hearing is that Dana is going to be caught dead playing with this card.
Yeah,
that's what I gathered.
Probably not be playing this. This set's Yarok or Muldrotha, which I don't mean that in a bad way necessarily. It's just a really, really, really strong creature in really strong colors that is going to be doing really strong things in games. It's not my jam at all, but I get why people are going to be playing it, and it's going to be very popular.
So of the other ones here, the other Apex, the other cards that have mutate in the wedge colors, Dana, are there any others that might jump out to you?
The other 4 all kind of blend together a little bit. I mean, if you want to run mutate in the particular wedge, they're what lets you do it, but I don't think any of them at all really jump out at me, other than to say Vadrak is probably the weakest of the 4. But I think they all kind of blend together a little bit. I don't have a preference enough to pick one of them to talk about.
So Vadrak, that's the Jeskai one, 3 mana, 3/3 flying first strike, mutates for 4 mana, and whenever it mutates, you can cast a non-creature spell with a converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. It looks interesting, but I do feel like you would need a high density of mutant stuff in your deck for this to be reliable, because that just has like a cast this for 4 mana out of the command zone and get one tiny thing back from my graveyard. I don't know. I reanimate a lot, so that looks like weak sauce in terms of abilities.
I mean, there's probably some way to do a loop where you cast this and then, cast the capsize in your graveyard to bounce back to your hand to replay it, to get some kind of a mini storm thing going. But I just think there's probably way easier ways to do it than this that requires you to have another creature in play in the first place to even cast it with the mutate ability. So it definitely can do things, but I think there's a lot of hoops to jump through there.
Yeah, the others are, there is one more that is kind of interesting to me. The Mardu one is called Snapdax. That's one that has double strike, and when it mutates, it does 4 damage to a creature or a planeswalker of an opponent's control, and then you gain 4 life, which does seem kind of cool, but again, you would need a high density of mutate effects to make this work, and the mutate cards just really aren't in these colors. It's very much an Otrimi type of thing in the Sultai colors from the Precon deck, which also, speaking of which, there's a Sultai one, Brokos, Apex of Forever, but Brokos is certainly not broken. It goes into the Otrimi deck because you can play it from your graveyard, but it just doesn't seem all that great as a commander on its own. The only other one that I think could actually stand a chance of doing something maybe a little bit original is Illuna, Apex of Wishes. This is the Teamer one, so it's a 5 mana 6/6 with flying and trample. It can mutate for 6 mana, and when it does mutate, you exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land permanent card. You put that onto the battlefield or into your hand. This one, I think, does open the door to something interesting, not with mutate specifically, but if you are doing a polymorph deck in the Teamer colors. If you know that the only permanents in your deck are something like an Ulamog or a Kozilek, then you can actually use some spells to create tokens, or maybe a Colony Garden type of effect, use some lands to create a token, mutate this onto that token from your command zone, and then boom, immediately flip into something like an Ulamog. That is probably the most interesting thing that I see for this particular commander. It does require a bit of a deck building hoop to make sure that there aren't too many permanents in your deck that you might accidentally flip into, but there is still something interesting that you can do with it.
These all kind of remind me of a couple summers ago in the core set when we got the new versions of all the original Elder Dragons, where there was kind of the one standout in the form of Arcades and the rest kind of bled together. They were all still, kind of imposing large mythic creatures, but there wasn't necessarily a lot about the rest of them aside from Arcades that stood out. And I'm kind of getting that vibe here a little bit, where we have this cycle of 3-color, mythic creatures. Nethroi stands out and the rest kind of don't.
Well, and Joey said that Brokos is not broken, but I think Brokos actually is broken, because typically Sultai legendary creatures are just insane, and Brokos is fairly tame. So I think the Oko part of Brokos, I think they were kind of scared. They dialed the design back a little bit. So I get it. Brokos did get broken along the design path.
Oh my goodness. All right, so those are our thoughts on those wedge-colored cards with the mutate ability, but there's also some mono-colored commanders in here. Matt, do you want to tell us about Kogla?
So Kogla the Titan Ape, Mr. King Kong himself, is 3 green, 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 that is triple green, for a 7/6 legendary ape. When Kogla the Titan Ape enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control, and then whenever Kogla attacks, destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player controls, and you can also pay 1 and a green, return target human you control to its owner's hand. Kogla gains indestructible until end of turn, so you can save that Sally Jane, whatever her name is, and make Kogla indestructible until end of turn, much like King Kong could.
I don't know the names of the characters in any of those movies aside
either.
from King Kong.
Faye Ray played her in the first movie. I know that from the Rocky Horror Picture Show soundtrack.
You are so old, Dana.
Beyond that.
You are so old.
What do we think of it as a commander? Because I got to tell you, I'm not impressed with it. Looping Eternal Witnesses sounds fun at first, I think, but there just aren't too many human creatures that I would be interested in returning consistently back to my hand to get this a 7/6 with indestructible. Green has more resilient and more powerful creatures that can do something like that already, so this one just doesn't really impress me.
I don't mind Kogla.
Yeah, I mean, it'll go in more green decks than at captains, I think, definitely. It doesn't scream commander to me, but I will definitely see it showing up in decks.
Yeah, and I think the returning a human you control, it's a good defensive thing, not just for Kogla, but if there is an important human that you have on the battlefield, being able to bounce it and save it, I think that is a fairly good ability. It's not quite as crazy as Temur Sabertooth's ability, because that just enables so many different combos. But Kogla has 2 other abilities that aren't irrelevant either. Being able to, it's an attack trigger, not a deals damage trigger, to blow up an artifact or an enchantment, which I think is pretty important. I can't think of anything that's going to make me want to play Kogla over any other mono green legend. But that doesn't mean it's bad. I think what Dana said is pretty accurate. It's going to go into some green decks because it is a big, dumb green creature. I just don't know if I'm going to put it at the helm of its own deck, I should say.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think that's true of the other monocolored commander that we've got going on here. This is Yadaro Wandering Monster. It is a 7 mana, 8/8 trample haste dinosaur turtle with cycling for 1 and a red. And a very, very strange ability indeed. When you cycle Yadaro, you shuffle it into your library from your graveyard. And if you've cycled a card named Yadaro 4 or more times this game, you then put it onto the battlefield from your graveyard. You put it onto the battlefield from your graveyard instead of doing the shuffle. So this immediately strikes me like it looks like a cycling payoff, but this is a trap for a format like ours and is much more a plant for a 4-of format where you can cycle several Yadaros and then get some 8/8s for free with that cycling free ability. But at the head of its own deck, I'd be mostly confused. It doesn't even have the meme value that something like Kogla might have, because like if you're going to, this is the first legendary turtle that I know of in Commander, in Magic, and it's not green and blue like most of the other turtles. Like, this card confuses me, and I just don't think it really belongs in our format, even in cycling decks.
Well, it's kind of got a what was it? Etrata the Silencer was the Dimir legend where when dealt damage got shuffled back in. It doesn't even have the benefit of being in blue or black where you get to draw a bunch of cards or tutor a bunch of cards. So in mono red, I don't know if this is going to be, besides the silliness factor, which I'm never going to fault anybody for wanting to build a silly deck. That is a very valid reason to build Dinosaur Turtle Tribal. It's a shame you can't have green in here, though, because then you could play the Dirtle Turtle, the Meandering Tower Shell. But as far as being at the head of its own deck, especially since you cycle from your hand, I'm not seeing the appeal here.
Yeah, and it also is just frustrating because, like, I would expect that any future, like, if we did get a legendary turtle to satisfy the folks who want a turtle deck, which is going to be green and blue, now it would have to be Temur to accommodate for this guy, and that just feels kind of weird. I don't know. The best place for this thing, since it is incidentally a dinosaur and a turtle, I think that you can play this for free off of a Gishath Sun's Avatar deck that puts a bunch of free dinosaurs into play. That seems like its best placement in terms of the EDH.
That is a good call. I forgot that Gishath will do that.
And I forgot that this thing was a turtle until I just read it very closely there. There's so much text on this card. All right, let's move on now to some of the 2-colored commanders that we're getting here. And this is where things get weird, strange, spicy, question mark, all of the above. Dana, can you tell us about Riel the Everwise?
Riel the Everwise, 1 and Izzet, so 3 mana total for a human wizard. Riel's a 0/3, but Riel the Everwise gets +1/+0 for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. However, the most important part of this here is whenever you discard one or more cards for the first time each turn, draw that many cards.
So good.
So
I want to put this in my Niv Mizzet Perrin deck because you can play Null Broach with this and just go absolutely hog wild with it, because Null Broach, it's an artifact that you can pay 2 and tap it, and you discard your hand to counter target non-creature spell.
Oh my goodness. So then you wouldn't even really be sacrificing your hand. You can easily run something like the aforementioned Ulamog, which will then, cause your graveyard to shuffle back up if you want to consistently wheel through your deck for a bunch of draw triggers. Or you can use Riel, and this is really what I like about her. She gets +1/+0 for each instance and sorcery in your graveyard. And this is what really, really matters and why she actually stands out to me. Of all of the commanders that we've gotten so far that matter a lot for the wheel effects, we had Shabraz and Brawlin, for example, that we talked about on last episode. There's also Xyrus, which is a very big wheels commander. But like wheels, while they got a huge boon from this set for sure, like we'll be seeing them a lot in EDH games to come because of the commanders like that. This one still does something that is different than all of those, and different even from stuff like Nikusar or the Locust God, which are also very famous established wheels decks. This one is basically a Voltron, and that is important. That is a different dynamic that this brings to the wheels conversation that I really, really appreciate, because this is a commander damage wheels deck.
Well, and one thing that I really like about Riel too is in a set where they just tried to show off, it feels like with a lot of the designs they came up with, this one, it feels very Izzet, but it's also just it's simple and it's elegant, and there's not 12 lines of text. It's just, hey, here's a quick ability, here's a quick other ability, and it works. And I think there's something to be said for having a simple design that's also very effective.
It's also going to make kind of weird, old, otherwise unplayable cards suddenly get very, very interesting. Goblin Lore did see some play in, I think, Modern, which is a 2-mana draw 4, then discard 3. That gets really, really good in this deck when it becomes a 2-mana draw 7, essentially.
Or the Cathartic Reunion, Faithless Looting, I agree with all those.
So that's always fun when you see cards like this that suddenly make old bad cards be really, really good.
And so many of the established stuff for this archetype fits very nicely into this too. You have the Niv Mizzet and the Psychosis Crawler to reward you for drawing a whole bunch of cards, which this thing will draw so many cards.
Of the legends, this might wind up being the one that's both atop the most decks and in the most 99s.
I'm happy for you to make that call, absolutely. And in fact, we have had just a trickle of data beginning to creep in at the time of recording. Again, this is being recorded at least a week and a half before the show episode actually comes out, so we have very, very little data, but Riel is showing at the top of those lists so far. So yeah, this one, definitely keep your eyes on it. It's going to be everywhere, and it really signals one of the biggest changes that I think Ikoria is bringing to Commander, and that is going to be the presence of wheel decks, because this type of stuff, Shabraz, Xyrus, in addition to the Locust God reprint, there's a lot of wheels that are going to be coming your way, and this will be heading many, many, many of them. Moving on now, we have a Boros commander that I can't really make up my mind about. Maybe I have made up my mind about it. This is Winota, Joiner of Forces, which I read as just, I'm going to call her Winota Rider, and I don't think anyone can stop me. This is a 4-mana human warrior. It's a 4/4. That says whenever a non-human creature you control attacks, you look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put a human creature card from among them onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. It gains indestructible until end of turn. And then you put the rest of the cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. I think that folks might already be able to tell from my tone that I'm not a super huge fan, but Matt, where are you at with this one?
I'm torn. I think Winota is actually kind of close to being a very good Boros commander, but the fact that Winota is asking for competing creature types, you need a non-human creature to get a human creature, that creates a weird deck building challenge. Now, granted, you do get to look at 6 cards, which is a decent amount, especially in Boros. But it's just the fact that it's a non-human to find the human. If it were human and human or non-human and non-human, I would like this a lot more. It is worth noting, though, that it doesn't have to be a non-token creature. So a token non-human can attack and get this trigger, which if you're playing a token deck in Boros, that is going to be a very powerful effect.
And it also doesn't say, whenever one or more non-human creatures you control attack. So this would be for every individual one if you do have multiple non-human tokens, and Boros can certainly make a lot of tokens that are just soldiers, not necessarily human soldiers, or or something like that. Even then, this commander would be so much more compelling to me if it could even still have the same non-human and human rider, but if they were swapped. If it was whenever a human you control attacks, you get a non-human to cheat into play, that would be so much more fascinating to me, because then you can cheat into play a bunch of angels or a bunch of dragons or something huge like that, which is really what you do want to cheat into play, not a bunch of humans. This, like, you're not going to save too much mana necessarily by like, ooh, I get a free Geist Honored Monk, probably, which is the type of card.
Or a free Tajik.
Right. And it's like, I see the Nethroi deck over there cheating everything into play. So this one just doesn't seem to, I don't know, it looks like card advantage. But again, like you said, your deck has to be very, very lopsided to make this work. I cheat stuff into play all the time, and this just isn't how I want to do it. I'm glad to see the expansion, but if Boros is going to do something new, I still want it to do something well. I'm not bothered personally by Boros getting a lot of attacky commanders as long as those attackies are good. And this is something different, but I'm not sure that it quite pushes it over the edge that I want it to, which is a real shame.
I will defend it. I do think you can make this work. I do think it requires a pretty specific deck and a pretty specific build path, but there are a good amount of humans that make non-human tokens when they enter the battlefield. There are things like Attended Knight that's only 3 mana that makes a 1/1 white soldier, and it's presumably, when they made the card, it was thought to be a human soldier, but it's not called a human soldier. It's just a soldier. There's multiple different variants on like Blade Splicer that makes a golem token when it comes into play. There's 4 or 5 different Kaladesh creatures that make a Thopter when they come into play. Even things like Pia Navar and Pia and Kieran Navar aren't terribly costly, and they make multiple tokens when they come into play. Propeller Pioneer, Celeros Songbirds makes a token. Like you can pretty easily throw together 25 or so creatures into this deck that also make one, if not more, non-human tokens when they come into play. And sure, maybe the first turn that you swing with those, you're going to get 2 humans. That's not that exciting. But if those 2 humans bring in like 3 or so other non-human tokens, then the next turn you drop, those all swing in, and then you get like 5 triggers then, and you're dropping humans that make that many more non-human creature tokens. In addition, you're running things like Catherine's Crusade or Divine Visitation or Anointed Procession to double up those tokens. I think there's definitely a strong deck to be made here. I just think it's going to force you to play probably that Army in the Can where you're running almost exclusively humans that make non-human tokens.
And that's, I actually really like, that was a really good breakdown of the stuff that you just mentioned. And you didn't even mention some of the more expensive humans that you can cheat into play, like Alina, Selfless Champion, for example.
Captain of the Watch.
Yeah, exactly. But I guess for me, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is just that like one of the most expensive cards that you can cheat into play with this ability is, as far as I know, Engrith's Marauders, which is a 7-mana 4/4 that doubles damage from your sources, which sounds fine, but as a guy who repeatedly summons Jin Gataxias into play with relative ease, I'm still not sure if all of that is going to compete with the types of cheating that so many of the other decks in this format are able to do.
It's a Boros card, so that means even in the best possible case scenario, it's fair. We can't have Boros do anything broken, so like in the perfect deck iteration, it's just going to be pretty decent.
I think this is going to be a fun deck, and I think if you can get it to work, if you have a good setup, like Dana said, a good setup will do very well. This is just, it makes me wish even more than before that Inspiring Commander weren't an arena-only card, because that card would be so good in a Winota deck. But that's just me. Let's move on.
Yes, yeah, there's another commander here that we've got to talk about that also mentions humans. Actually, I just said we have to talk about it. I'm not sure if I want to talk about it for too long. I'm throwing a little shade at this one. Matt, can you tell us about General Kudro?
General Kudro of Draneth, 1 in Orzhov colors for a 3/3 human soldier that you can cheat in with Winota.
No, you can't, because this is a Orzhov card and that's a Boros deck.
Well, you're playing Mardu, obviously. But anyway, so General Kudro of Draneth reads, other humans you control get +1/+1. And whenever General Kudro of Draneth or another human enters the battlefield under your control, exile target card from opponent's graveyard. There you go, Joseph. And then also you can pay 2 and sacrifice 2 humans, destroy target creature with power 4 or greater.
I think this goes into a Jarina Kudro deck. But if Kunaros, Hound of Athreos, is any indication, that one only has 64 total decks. I don't think this is a very ideal commander. There's some human anthem, but still there's also another human anthem in the Mardu style. If you want to do human tribal, I feel like Jarina's doing it better, and Jarina's not doing it very well.
I mean, I think General Kudro is going to be a fine support card in any Black-White X human deck. I know Mardu Humans is going to get a good boost, and so putting this into the 99, the legendary creature I don't think is that relevant. I don't know if people are going to build a lot of General Kudro decks, but General Kudro is going to go into a lot of decks, and I think that is worth mentioning because it does a lot of things. It's a very good hate bear that beefs up your army. It has some Grave Hate built in, has removal built in. That's a very, very good utility card. So it would not surprise me to have this, of all the legendary creatures that go into the 99, this might be one of the higher played ones, I think.
Only within those specific decks, though. I still like Nethroi is going to show up in more decks, I think, than this one. And Nethroi has an additional color to worry about.
Well, Nethroi's nuts.
I know, Nethroi is a sorcery. It's not a commander. That thing's absolutely ridiculous. But in terms of General Kudro, it's an anthem for human decks. But if you are trying to look, it has a sacrifice ability to destroy other stuff. But other Orzhov commanders like Eiley already have that base covered. I'm just not super impressed by it, but it does go into the human tribal lists that Mardu is going to allow us to do. Up next is a Golgari commander that I also kind of wish I could skip over. I'm being a little bit too shady. My apologies, everyone. But this is Cheville, Bane of Monsters, a 2-mana 1/3 human rogue with Death Touch. At the beginning of your upkeep, if your opponents control no permanents with bounty counters on them, you put a bounty counter on target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls, and whenever a permanent an opponent controls with a bounty counter on it dies, you gain 3 life and draw a card. I'm so proud that we finally have a pretty bad Golgari commander. I play so much Golgari. I could play nothing but Golgari for the rest of my Magic playing existence, but this one is the very final one that I would touch. This is a very restrictive cost, and this is a placement, again, for constructed formats, but not really for EDH. There's not a lot that Cheville can offer us, I'm afraid.
This card reminds me a lot of another Golgari commander from 7 years ago-ish, Pharika, God of Affliction. Pharika had some restrictions in that any creature you exile from a graveyard, the person whose graveyard it was got the 1/1 black and green enchantment creature Death Touch token. You could have taken 3 restrictions off that Pharika card, and it still wouldn't have been one of the top half of the best gods. This is a similar situation. You could take a couple of these restrictions off Cheville, and it still isn't at all close to being one of the better legends in the set. There's just a huge amount of things on this card that make it not great in Commander, at least.
Yeah.
This card's definitely a plant for 60 card formats,
Yes.
and I think we can be fine with that because not everything needs to be for us.
Yeah, there's always got to be a commander from any set that ends up as the least popular commander from that set, and this is my vote for the one.
And this is a genuinely probably a very kind of bad commander card, and this is going to be a fantastic card to open an unlimited pool or something.
Yep.
Oh, very much indeed. When we talk about fantastic cards, there's another 2-mana commander in this set next up for us to talk about. We are trading black for blue. We're going from Golgari into Simic. This is Keenan Bonder Prodigy. Dana, do you want to take this one? Because I'm just floored.
Keenan Bonder Prodigy, green and blue, so 2 Simic, for a legendary creature, human druid. Keenan is a 2/2 and says whenever you tap a non-land permanent for mana, add 1 mana of any type that permanent produced. As if that wasn't enough, and that is enough. That's absolutely enough. However, Keenan then says 5 in Simic, so 7 total. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a non-human creature card from among them onto the battlefield and put the rest in the bottom of your library in any order. And that is not a tap ability. That's just an activated ability for 7 mana. On a commander that makes a ton of mana.
Oh, a ton of mana. Again, you've misread the card. This makes infinite mana. You pair this with something like a Basalt Monolith, and because it will create additional mana. I am floored that this does not have a restriction that it only adds additional mana from creatures that you have, which still would be fun and fair. But this is... So there's a companion in this set named Zirda that we're not actually going to address on this show, but that one also has abilities, similar combo potential with something like Basalt Monolith. And people were like, oh my goodness, this is so interesting. And then Keenan comes out up next and is like, hey, I can also do that. And when you have that infinite mana, I have a place to put all of that that infinite mana. And this will probably find you some type of creature combo that will completely decimate the rest of the board. And we're like, can't we let Boros have something, please?
Well, and this card single-handedly made Pemminzara a $10 card. It was a $2 card a week ago, and then all of a sudden Kinnan comes out and you could
I'm not sure if that was Pemminzora, if that is related to Keenan, because Pemminzora also goes with Zaxara. You slap a Pemminzora on Zaxara, and then that can also give you infinite mana, because it taps for 2 mana, and then Pemminzora can untap.
Well,
it.
everything combos with Pemminzara at this point. Let's be
right.
honest.
If you like, it does also go here. I guess it's 2 things basically. Like this thing's absolutely busted. When you see this, I like the way that Benny Smith, former guest of the podcast, I like the way that he put it best. If you see a Keenan deck, it is not going to be a simple Keenan deck. It is going to be a combo Keenan deck. There's almost no way around it.
Kind of like how Shovel could have had some restrictions removed and it still wouldn't be a good commander. Keenan could have had several restrictions added to the card and it would still be fantastic.
Yeah, I don't know if this supplants the throne that Thrasios has taken. Most likely not. But if Keenan doesn't end up being one of the more popular decks along the same lines that we saw Vanifar's trajectory from the Ravnica block, Vanifar really launched up in popularity in terms of, a lot of people wanted to build it. And that one also had tons of combo potential. Prime Speaker Vanifar did a whole bunch of that. But then we also saw it slowly drift back down. And I have my fingers crossed, or at least I would kind of predict that Keenan has a similar storyline where the combo is crazy. People are really excited to see it, but then that combo might be a little bit redundant for them game after game. And then just like Vanifar, it may slowly dwindle in numbers and let some of the other stuff like Riel take more of the screen time at the very top
There's also
spots.
a lot of competition among some of the commanders to play something that's busted. So like, if you wanted to do that, you've had plenty of chances along the way to build that busted Simic deck. This is just one more in the pool, and I'm not sure at this point if anyone is that excited to have their 14th different option to play broken Simic stuff.
Yeah, very, very popular indeed. I wish that they would have just let the Boros commander have the combo and not let the Simic commander also incidentally do the combo, but so it goes.
So I'm going to cut you guys off now. I know we like Simic, and Simic does some Simic things, but I'm going to talk about some Gruul. We're going to talk about the buy box promo now. It is Godzilla, King of the Monsters, a.k.a. Zalortha, Strength Incarnate. It is 3 in Gruul colors. That is a red and a green for a 7/3 legendary dinosaur with trample. Lethal damage dealt to creatures you control is determined by their power rather than their toughness. And if that wasn't confusing, it's lethal damage. But it's, I don't know. Joey, help me out here. Come on, Judge.
No, I'm not a judge. It is, when you see a 7/3, you're like, oh, I can deal with that with just a simple blocker. But no, this one does make it a little bit more complicated. It's been called the reverse Doran, the siege tower, which is sort of true. Doran forces the toughness to be the thing that things deal damage with. This causes power to be the things by which stuff will be determined. But it is only for your stuff, which can be a boon. I have a number of issues with this card. I don't know. I'm still determining how I feel about the framing, because this is one of the introductions where we do have different types of frames that you can do, and they are all themed around Godzilla stuff. We have Godzilla. Another card that we'll talk about in a second is going to have the skinning of Mothra. Like, there is all of that going on here. This one, I don't know if I really like crossing the IP too much, but I really shouldn't be a stickler about that. If that's your jam, totally go for it. But this one is a little weird in that it doesn't actually have a non-Godzilla thing. There is no other Zalortha Strength Incarnate. And on top of that, I also just find this kind of to be a little bit lackluster, unfortunately. It is a 5-mana 7/7, which could be interesting, but I don't know, like a lot of the most important creatures that have big power in our format also already have big toughness too. Mostly what you'll be getting is like, a 3-mana 5/1 that turns into a 3-mana 5/5, or Kamal gets a little bit better, I guess, because he's a 6/1 and now he can be treated as a 6/6, but that's still not really the reason you play him. I just, unfortunately, I'm not really pleased by this guy necessarily with what he can do. It is an interesting line of text, but I'm not sure that it necessarily pays off, just because the power balance is already pretty even for a lot of the big stuff that we want to smash people with already.
Well, also there's a flavor mismatch there. What is really strong, or at least much stronger in this deck, is any kind of fire breathing effect, and Godzilla doesn't have fire breathing.
That's fair.
So flavor fail right there too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the card is terribly compelling, but I mean, it's fine. It's weird thinking of just lethal damage and trying to explain to newer players. Granted, I don't think newer players are going to get their hands on this because it is a buy a box promo. That's the only way you can get it. So thankfully, it's not going to show up too often. I just don't think this is going to be too terribly popular, and I don't know really what else we can say about it.
Yeah, which is unfortunate, I think. Here's another thing that I can say about it. This is one of, I think, 5 total cards in the set that have these alternate frames that has the word Godzilla in its name. So when someone tells me that they're playing their Godzilla deck, I will unfortunately genuinely have to ask the question, which one?
Yeah. I mean, the 2 names to each card, that is probably the most confusing thing to me about it. It is not my thing. It is very silver bordered. Admittedly, I struggle with it. But yeah, it stinks that you're going to have to ask, okay, well, what is that card actually? Because they're going to give you the Toho version name, and people aren't going to know what that is, and that kind of stinks.
Yeah, it's just a weird bridge to... If it had been just mutate in the set, or maybe just keyword counters, or maybe just these, or just companions, then I think that it would be a little bit easier of a pill for me to swallow. But all of these things at once is really... I mean, Dana, you made the joke at the beginning of the show about the SATs. I don't think that mutate is the only mechanic that belongs on that. Even this has kind of thrown my brain for a little bit of a loop, and it... Well, you know what? Let's just move on to the next card that we want to talk about, which is the one that I alluded to earlier, the one that has a skinning of Mothra. This is Luminous Broodmoth. Looking at the alternate frame for this one, it looks like a legendary creature to me, but it isn't a legendary creature. What it is a 4-mana, 3/4 flying insect that says whenever a creature you control without flying dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter on it. So that's really, really good, by the way. But I'm just going to look at this all the time, especially if it's in that Mothra reskinning, and I'll think that it's legendary, but it isn't. And that is going to throw my brain for a loop. But that's maybe just me. I don't need to, be a curmudgeon about the stuff in the set. There's a lot happening. It's overriding my brain just a little bit, so I can't think too hard. But at the end of the day, what I can think about is that this card's bonkers good. This
card is so insane. Like, it makes Undying not worth playing anymore because you have Unflying.
Unflying.
But seriously, this card is amazing, and this is going in every white deck that I ever wanted to put into a white deck.
That is such a loaded phrase for us to say, oh, this goes in every, and then insert name of huge category here. That is such a trap phrase for us to say in a set review. Because that's something that can be very hyperbolic that we don't need to say. But this thing's crazy good. This one is really, really crazy good. And you play a lot of aggro, and aggro decks will love this because it gets your stuff back. If you pair this with the enchantment Solemnity, where the creatures cannot have counters put back on them, then you are able to open up combos. And those are 2 mono white cards. Like, you can pair Solemnity and then maybe a Phyrexian Altar or something like that, and you have a mono white ability to create infinite mana. And that's usually the kind of thing that we associate with other colors. I'm really proud of design on this one, even though I don't personally like the flying counters as much. Taking advantage of something like that, you can unlock other aspects like the card Mikaeus. This strikes me as a white version of the Mikaeus, and it's going to do tons of nasty stuff, especially if you're playing it something like a Teysa Karlov deck. That strikes me as one of the decks that's especially happy to get this one, because then you can repeat those death triggers so much. This card's absolutely not so. Absolutely not so.
It is, but it's funny talking about it being a staple. Looking at like the decks I have that play white, it's not a good card in any of them, just because, in my Super Friends deck doesn't have many creatures. My Sphinx deck, they already have flying. my Enchantress deck, the commander has flying, and it's only 10 creatures in the whole deck anyway. So it's a really, really good card, but I do agree with that thing that it's a little bit hyperbole about it going in every white deck. I just happen to have none that it works in for whatever weird reason.
Yeah.
I said every one of my white decks. Thank you very much.
Okay, there we go. That's
so...
But yeah, especially if you're looking to do anything even minorly aristocratic with the death triggers, this I will not be shocked when this ends up being one of, if not the most popular card from the set. The only other thing that I think will claim its top spot in terms of total popularity is going to be this colorless 1-mana artifact that we have next to talk about, which if I read it, I'll start doing an Aaron Campbell giggle because it's so obnoxious. So Matt, can you read this one for me? Because I can't deal with this card. This is ridiculous.
With the Ozolith?
With the Ozolith.
So the Ozolith is a legendary artifact for 1 mana that reads, whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters onto the Ozolith. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may move all counters from the Ozolith onto target creature. This is silly. It's silly.
Yeah.
This feels like a card that somebody in your shop who has a +1 counters deck said, "Hey guys, I made a custom card for my deck. Can I play it tonight?" And you're like, "Sure, all right." And they play this, and you're like, "No, you can't play that. Why did you think that was okay at 1 mana?"
Oh my goodness. It's so I mean, obviously something with keyword counters like the new Cathrall Aspect Warper is really going to enjoy the Ozolith, but +1 counters are just absolutely beautiful. One of my favorite commanders is Rayhan, Last of the Abzan, and this gives the Rayhan ability to any deck that wants to use it. You can also load up different types of counters on this, such as -1 counters if you got a bunch of them. Let's say you're playing Hapatra and you accidentally put like a bunch of -1 counters on your own stuff with something like a Black Sun Zenith. Well, then you can also like load them onto here to give away at some other time if you want. Like, this thing is totally nutso. And if you are playing with counters in any way in your decks, you will be hard pressed not to find a reason to run this one. I'm shook. I'm shook. This is going into any deck that I build that has counters in it. I'm absolutely shook by this one.
Yeah, it's really good. That's all. I nothing to add other than it's excellent.
That's a good way to put it. It's just, it is.
But the value has not stopped, because now we're reaching the point where we're going to talk about 5 new ultimatums. Like we saw in Shards of Alara, we had ultimatums for the shards, but now we've got ultimatums for the wedges, and they also are, some of these, when I read them, I was just like, this can't be right? And no, it is right. There's one for Abzan, Eerie Ultimatum. It's 2 white, 3 black, 2 green. You return any number of permanent cards with different names from your graveyard to the battlefield. So unless you're playing Rat Colony or Shadowborn Apostles, this is just all of the permanents in your graveyard. There's Ruinous Ultimatum, the Mardu one, 7 mana, destroy all non-land permanents your opponents control. Like, I've only read 2 of them and I'm already floored again. Like, what is happening? These cards are bonkers.
I mean, if I was any deck playing those colors, I feel like would have to have something really weird going on in how you built it to not want to run these 2.
If you're playing 4 color or 5 color,
sure,
it gets a little harder. But if you're playing Mardu or Abzan, I don't know why you wouldn't run one of these, which again is such a loaded phrase for us to say on a set review show. It sounds so hyperbolic and outlandish, and that's usually the type of language that when I'm listening to a set review, I'm just like, I don't know. I don't think so. But these things are bonkers.
They're really,
these things are
really
crazy.
Yeah, I think this is just the ultimatums. I think a lot of this set is just they took the power creep that it's kind of been sneaking up a little bit in the past few sets and just cranked it to 11 and just said, you know what? Whatever people think Commander is, we're just going to make this set what people think Commander is. And everything is over the top, massive effects, super splashy cards. And that's just what we're seeing right here, is just all these are just over the top, insane value cards.
So in particular, the 2 ultimatums that we just read there are the kind that I especially think that they will rise to the top, because they don't necessarily require that you build around their abilities. Like, you can do the same thing with Nethroi. I mean, Eerie Ultimatum and Nethroi are almost exactly the same card. It's a little ridiculous. But you don't have to build around them if you don't want to. Eerie Ultimatum can just be used to revive a big Abzan graveyard after the course of a game, and you just want to bring some stuff back. Ruinous Ultimatum, if you're playing Mardu, it's always going to be good to destroy all non-land permanents your opponents control. Like, oh my goodness, really throws into sharp relief how good Cyclonic Rift is when you see this type of text on a non-blue card. But the other 3 are the kind that I think you do have to build around a little bit more consciously to make them as busted. Is there any of them that jump out to you guys in specific that might rise to the next in terms of popularity from the Teamer, the Sultai, and the Jeskai offerings that we have here from the Ultimate?
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't actually ever bother to look this up, but like the first time I saw Emergent Ultimatum, which is a Sultai one, search your library for up to 3 monocolored cards with different names and exile them. An opponent chooses one of those cards, shuffle that card into your library, and you may cast the other cards without paying their mana cost. I just assumed, like, well, there's definitely some 3-card combo that no matter what your opponent chooses, you win the game. And I haven't looked to see what that is, but like I feel like there definitely is one.
I mean, I'm sure Omniscience is one of those, just because it seems very fitting, but I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, the fact that it's not limited to only creatures on the Sultai Ultimatum, that is pretty nuts. So I think all of them are very powerful in their own way. I think the Jeskai one is the least powerful, I would say, you gain 5 life, deals 5 damage to any target, and then you draw 5 cards. I mean, drawing 5 cards is pretty powerful, gain a little bit of life, but the Genesis Ultimatum, seems like such a fun, just roll the dice and see what happens type of card. So you look at the top 5 cards of your library, put any number of permanent cards from among them onto the battlefield and the rest into your hand, and you exile Genesis Ultimatum. That is, the teamer one. So whatever's in the top 5, you're going to just either get a ton of value or you're going to get none of the value. So it seems like a very fun, high ceiling, but very, very low floor. Depends on what is stacked in your deck. Emergent Ultimatum, the Sultai one, you get to search your library. With the Teamer one, you don't. So that is a very, very big difference.
Yeah, you look at the Teamer one, Genesis Ultimatum, and you compare it to the Esper Ultimatum, which I think was Brilliant Ultimatum, and that's like a kind of fact or fiction that almost gives you the Genesis Ultimatum ability, and it's just like, wow, things have really improved. You're totally right, Dana, that there's going to be any combination of cards that you can do with Emergent Ultimatum that will probably allow you to just straight up win the game. I'm not sure I'm too bothered by it, because that's also been true of other big spells like Tooth and Nail, for example. You've always had the ability to, cast a Tooth and Nail and then find any 2 creatures that will allow you to combo off. So, if someone's doing the omnisciency type of deal with Emergent Ultimatum, putting someone into a point where no matter which of these cards that you choose, I'm going to be able to probably win the game. That is a good use case for it, but it's also just good if you want to cheat a bunch of really big creatures into play, which I really love to do. Let's say you want to get a Praetor like a Jin-Gitaxias or a Vorinclex. This is the kind of thing that you can get with that too. Sultai is famous for it. I do think that you do have to be a bit more conscious with these other 3 as opposed to the Mardu and the Obzon ones. Like the Jeskai one, for example, I agree, Matt, that it is probably the weakest of the 3. Notably, it doesn't require you to exile it afterwards like some of these others do, so it can be repeated if you do have some type of recursion effect. That is pretty cool. Genesis Ultimatum, the Teamer one, strikes me as like a home run in a Maelstrom Wanderer deck, but aside from that, you are going to have to be pretty conscious of like, ooh, is this a Spellslinger Teamer deck, or is this a creature-based Teamer deck? So there are slightly more restrictions on restrictions on those. But even then, these are still way, way intense. Woof. Like, these cards are bonkers, you guys.
Yep, I mean, that's a very good way to put it. Just these cards are bonkers, and that's all that we really need to say about them that we haven't said already.
Yeah, the Obzon and the Mardu one, I think you have to have a really good reason why you're not running those. Emergent Ultimatum is very close within that definition for me too. And then Jeskai and Teamer, I think you have to be a little bit more conscious of why you're playing those. You have to build around them just a smidge more, but they are all still very, very good. That's not the only wedge great non-creature spell treatment stuff that we got here, because each one of these color combinations also got some enchantments. Matt, what do you think of these enchantments that we got for him? Which ones stand out to you?
So the weakest ultimatums actually, I think, got the strongest enchantments, and it's kind of the reverse. I think that the Jeskai, the Whirlwind of Thought, which is their enchantment, and then Song of Creation, which is the Teamer enchantment, are insanely powerful. The other 3, they don't spark a lot of juices flowing in my creative brain. But the first 2 do definitely. Whirlwind of Thought, the Jeskai one, is just 1 in Jeskai colors, a blue, a red, and a white for an enchantment, and it just says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, draw a card. That's it.
Okay.
It's just, I heard you like to play combo decks and you like to cast a lot of spells in a turn. Let's reward that.
And one thing nice about that is I always felt like it's just too bad that when a Narset deck casts all their cards for free off the top, they then, don't get a bunch of other cards to hand to protect those with. And now that solves that problem. You can draw a bunch of counter spells when you cast all your cards for free to protect your extra turns. And
oh my goodness.
Yeah. So that works out very nicely there.
And there's a similar ability happening on the other one, Song of Creation, where you can play an additional land on each of your turns, and also whenever you cast a spell, any spell, you draw 2 cards. But downside, at the beginning of your end step, you discard your hand. But these both occupy a lot of the same space. Whenever we see something that says, whenever you X, you draw a card, it always teeters very, very dangerously into a Storm category. And that's where I think, as much as a Kai card deck will want to try and restrain Whirlwind of Thought, I think that these particular enchantments open up the doors to, oops, I just went off with a combo because I play a card, draw, I play, I draw, I play, I draw, and then I just cycle through into some huge Aetherflux Reservoir win condition that is exciting to be sure, but also like these aren't just the kind of things that get you value, they get you wins.
Yeah, these win games when they stick, for sure.
So what about the other enchantments then? Dana, any of them stick out to you?
Death's Oasis I think is quite interesting. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard, then return a creature card with lesser converted mana cost than the creature that died from your graveyard to your hand. And you can sacrifice it to gain life equal to the greatest converted mana cost among creatures you control. That last ability I don't think is going to get used that much, but I think it's interesting to have a relatively efficiently costed enchantment. It's only 3 mana sitting there, kind of sending things to your hand when something dies in colors that tend to want to sacrifice things. It doesn't work with tokens, which hurts, but I think there's something there.
Yeah, as a Reanimator player myself, most Reanimator decks I don't think are going to want to bother too much with returning stuff to your hand. A Carador deck, for example, probably is already doing things a bit more quickly than this particular card will allow. I think that the commander that benefits most from this might actually be Kethis, the Hidden Hand, because he likes having a big graveyard, and he also wants his legends to make a really big impact on the board. And if they go away, he wants to get other legends back. Like, that is a game, a commander that really appreciates a longevity in the game to outlast using a bunch of really big heavy hitters, as opposed to some of the other more traditional reanimation stuff that we see in Abzan. But this Abzan enchantment is definitely interesting. I want to like the Mardu one, which creates a 1/1 token version of a dead creature of yours. But it is, I think I would rather play one of Matt's favorite black cards, which is nice that he plays any black cards, and that's Nightmare Shepherd, which also has a similar ability when your creatures die. I think the death trigger is a lot more interesting to me there. And really what I'm trying to do is just get to us talking about the Sultai 1 Titan's Nest, the 4-mana enchantment that gives your stuff Delve. At the beginning of your upkeep, you look at the top card of your library, you may put that card into your graveyard, and then you can exile the card from your graveyard to add a specifically colorless mana, and you can only spend that mana to cast a colored spell, so no Eldrazi, and that spell cannot have an X in its mana cost either. But yeah, all your stuff got Delve. Like, that's ridiculous. If you're playing Sultai Ascendancy, first of all, stop, because it's not as good as some other options that we've got, and this is certainly one of them. Here's your direct replacement. But yeah, you can get stuff. You can play the free. Delve's real good, guys. Delve is really good.
I mean, this is probably a playable Sultai enchantment, even without that first clause where you can look at the being you can look at a card and put it into your graveyard if you choose to. That's just gas for this, but like even without that, it's probably still really, really playable in Sultai.
Oh, yeah, very much. Like, if I want to, instead of reanimating a big dead creature, if I actually want to cast any big creatures that are stuck in my hand, I can exile stuff in my graveyard to get a 2-mana Jin Cataxius. That sounds fine. Like, Delve can be a true cost. Like, you do have a limited supply sometimes of cards in your graveyard, but that's also kind of a benefit to some commanders. I think the commander that's most excited about this one, like Sidisi will like the mill aspect of this card because it can potentially create her zombies, but also Tasigur wants to have a sculpted graveyard so that Tasigur's activated ability can get back the cards that you specifically want. So this is really exciting for a whole bevy of Sultai decks, and Delve on your spells is real bonkers. So if you see this one, I'd really be afraid of it, and I think that you will see this one quite a bit.
Up next for interesting cards here, we have Drannith Magistrate, 1 and a white for Human Wizard. The important part here isn't the 1/3 body, but instead your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. That includes graveyards, Joey.
Yes, it does, but most of the spells I cast get stuff back from the graveyard for me, so I don't know if I'm too worried, although it restricting my ability to play my commander is certainly noteworthy.
Yeah, I would assume this probably has a much bigger home in like a CEDH environment where people are doing shenanigans out of their library and out of exile and out of their graveyard. I think it's a hate bear for the most part in the game I play.
I mean, I've been waiting for a card that can finally shut down Panglacial Worms. So
there we go. And now
this is quite the relief for me to see. Panglacial Worm is no longer an issue.
Oh my goodness. No, this is the type of, I don't think that this will be ubiquitous. I don't think it's like too egregious either. Like, oh, it looks really scary, but it is still a 1/3 with no defensive capabilities. That's not a ton of toughness. I'm not really worried about it necessarily, unless it's showing up in a dedicated hate bear strategy like Gadok Teague or some Sidar Timna builds I know that do a bit of the hate bear strategy, or maybe even a Grand Arbiter deck, which really loves to shut things down. So I think that this has a dedicated home for it rather than being a ubiquitous white card, but it will be very annoying in the decks that want to play it, because those decks are dedicated to making the game very difficult for your opponents to play in the first place.
I imagine people are going to play Drannith Magistrate next to Knowledge Pool and just really mess with everybody.
Oh, there's also that.
The entire game.
Yeah. Oh, because then they just can't cast the spells that the Knowledge Pool would require them. Oh, yeah, so that's mean. Wow, you are really mean. You are very mean, Master Morgan.
I am. That's not the worst thing you've said to me, though, so I can live with it.
All right.
Anyways, let's move on.
There's a handful of Mythos cards here that could be interesting, worth talking about. I think the standout for me again is going to be one of the Abzan ones, Mythos of Nethroi, the 3-mana instant with a line of text that is very difficult to parse. Destroy target non-land permanent if it's a creature, or if green-white was spent to cast this spell. That's the most confusing wording I've seen since the card Dead Ringers, but it can be 3 mana to destroy target creature, or it can be Obzon colors 3 mana to destroy target non-land permanent. On an instant, this seems pretty good, nice and versatile. I quite enjoyed this one.
I mean, murder was a big deal not that many years ago, so this is a better murder if you're playing the colors that can abuse it anyway.
Right. It can only go in decks that include Obzon in them. So given that restriction and the fact that you'll probably want good access to the ability to actually get the non-land permanent version of it, you will probably only find it relegated to Obzon decks. Because if you are playing, 5-color, you'll probably just end up using Anguished Unmaking instead to get a bit more versatility. Or even possibly just a Beast Within to get more.
Right. I mean, even in Obzon, you're competing with Beast Within and Generous Gift and Assassin's Trophy. And there's a lot of competition even there.
Right, that's also definitely true. There are some other mythoses here. This is actually a full cycle. Any of them stand out to you guys?
I really like the Mythos of Snapdax. It is 2 white for a sorcery. Each player chooses an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and planeswalker from among the non-land permanents they control. Then they sacrifice the rest. And then if you spend a red and a black, so it turns into red, black, white, you choose the permanents for each player instead. So I love Cataclysm effects. They're always very fun. There was one for Magic Origins that was also good. These effects are extremely powerful. If you get the clause where you pay the red and the black, being able to choose what permanents the opponents control or get to keep, I should say, that's a game-winning play right there, too.
I totally disagree. This one, if we were doing Challenge the Stats on this episode, which I don't think we will end up having time for because of how much is happening in this set, but if you end up paying the much more restrictive cost, this is just the card Tragic Arrogance, which is a 5-mana mono version that doesn't require you to jump through hoops to activate the same thing. That shows up in about 4,000 decks or so. That can be a good effect, but this isn't something new. So Mythos of Snapdax, I think, is actually kind of a trap because I'd rather have Tragic Arrogance where I don't have to be very careful about the types of mana that I'm spending to cast this spell.
Yeah, and like I said, if you get that off, the 4 mana is different, and the fact that you get to choose for the opponents, that's where I'm very intrigued by this effect.
But that's also true of Tragic Arrogance. For each player, you choose from among the permanents that control an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker. So again, it's just not something that we've seen before, and that doesn't seem to have taken a lot of people by storm since it was already a pre-existing effect.
It's also kind of a shunned type of effect as well, though.
I suppose. I don't know. I don't think that too many of the other mythoses really stand out to me. Mythos of Brokos is the one that belongs in Sultai decks. It's a 4-mana sorcery that lets you get permanents back from your graveyard to your hand, but you can also search your library for a card and put it into your graveyard if you spent blue and black to cast this. I still think I'd probably rather play Gerard's Orders because that one's not as restrictive on the mana. I don't know. I think that the Obzon Mythos is the only one that really, really stands out to me.
Yeah, I agree. But one I would like to hear your opinion on here is Fiend Artisan. It's a Golgari, so double hybrid mana for a Nightmare 1/1. That's all very uninspiring. But it gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard, and it has X and Golgari to tap, sacrifice another creature, search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Activate this ability anytime you could cast a sorcery. So it's Birthing Pod on a creature.
Except that it's not. Birthing Pod lets you go up the food chain and doesn't require a bunch of mana. This goes down the food chain.
Or sideways.
Yeah, unless you spend a bunch of mana. And I don't know, given my experience with the Birthing Pod style strategy, I don't think you want to spend a bunch of mana on this ability. It is really nice if you pair it with something like Unbound Flourishing, for example. But even then, I think it's kind of loose. Like, that does double the X, which can open up some doors. But I think this thing's real use case is going to probably end up being used in Gerard, for example, because Gerard likes having a big graveyard. You can get this into play, and then this will get +1 for all the creatures in your graveyard, and then you'll be able to use Gerard to sacrifice to do a bunch of damage. Can maybe get you something else if you need in the meantime. But this isn't the kind of auto staple that I would normally expect for something that has a Birthing Pod style ability. I don't know. If this one gets up in price, especially because it is a mythic, I think this is the kind of thing that we can skip, just as Golgari players, because this effect isn't something that's really breathtaking compared to some of the other stuff that we've already seen, and there's a good chance, I think, that this gets a high price tag on it.
That was kind of my thought as well, but I saw people kind of getting hyped on it, so I wanted to hear what you had to say. So thank you for confirming that I am in fact wise.
when when I like cheating stuff into play, I don't like having to pay a bunch of mana for it. That's really just where I fall down on it. All right, here's another card that if I read, I'm not going to be able to make it through with a straight face. Matt, do you want?
So why are you giving me the flying shark thing?
Because it's a flying shark thing. If there's anyone on this podcast that embodies the flying shark thing, it's definitely you.
I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but I'll read the card regardless. So we have Shark Typhoon. It is 5 and a blue for an enchantment that says, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you create an XX blue shark creature token with flying, because why not? Where X is that spell's converted mana cost, and Shark Typhoon also has cycling, because why not? So you can cycle it for X, 1 and a blue, and then whenever you cycle Shark Typhoon, you create an XX blue shark creature token with flying. This card is literally Sharknado. It's a fine card. I don't think it's bad.
It's a really good card. It goes in with the same category of stuff like Metallurgic Summonings, useful for someone like Alila or maybe Brutaclad to make a bunch of different types of tokens. That's really fascinating. But oh my goodness, as if this set wasn't silver bordered enough. Like, I like when Magic takes its own version of a thing. Like, it took its own spin on Greek mythology, for example. I don't like when it just becomes a meme. Like, this feels like it winks way too hard at the camera for me. And I really don't know what's next after this completely memetic card. Like, what are we going to follow this with? Snakes on a Planeswalker? Like, I'm just not here for it.
Well, this card literally broke the fourth wall and like stepped out of the movie and started having a conversation with itself. So,
well, to talk about the actual card itself.
Yes. Yeah.
I have a Talrand deck that is built around playing a ton of cheap cantrips to make me drakes, which I attack with, and I have things that buff those drakes in the air. So this should, in theory, work nicely with that deck. It makes flyers every time I cast one of those cheap cantrips, except for I kind of don't want to take an entire turn off to cast a 6-mana enchantment that will probably not do anything at all till the next turn. And what it does is make tokens that still can attack. So I think it's a neat card, but I don't know if my deck that should be perfect for it even really wants to run it. And I also don't want to keep track of a dozen different tokens, all of which may have different power and toughnesses.
Yeah, but I have seen a Metallurgic Summonings completely wreck a table
for
before.
Sure.
So there is definitely that. But I am not here for the precedent. Like in 5 years, we'll see Thrumming Bird Demic or something like that. I just can't with this card.
Yeah, it feels like a Swarm Intelligence type of card where you have to take a turn off, like Dana said, and then the returns are variable in between. Yes. And so I don't know if it's going to be effective at helping you win games that you weren't already winning.
I'm just going to spend the rest of this podcast coming up with other Magic-related movie titles, like The Wicker Mana or something like that. Like this sounds. The card's good. People will play it. It's good. You have to be careful about where you play it, but I just cannot with the Sharknado.
Well, let's talk about Heartless Sister Act then.
I was just gonna say that. Oh, Matt, you're so great.
It's quick on the gun. That's what I am. So Heartless Act, not Heartless Sister Act, is 1 and a black for an instant spell, and you can choose one. You either destroy target creature with no counters on it, or you remove up to 3 counters from target creature. What do you guys think of this one?
I can't talk. I'm still laughing.
I mean, it's probably very comparable to Go for the Throat in terms of what things it can hit. And Go for the Throat's a really decent card in Commander and saw a ton of play in Standard. I think this is a really nice removal spell that probably sees as much play or close to it as Go for the Throat as well, which nowadays is probably less than it did 5 years ago. It's a fine card that maybe isn't what it would have been had this came out in Return to Ravnica or something.
Go for the Throat shows up in about 12,000 decks, so that's definitely got a lot of numbers to it. Of the top commanders, there are plenty that this will be able to hit for sure. You know, your Muldrothas, your Marins, your Goloses, stuff like that. There are a few that you'll have to watch out for. Like, this isn't going to be ending a Korvold's Day anytime soon. My actual use case for this would be when you specifically want to be able to also potentially, even if it is just in a handful of games here or there, but still potentially have the ability to take advantage yourself of removing 3 counters from a creature from your own stuff. Say that you've got a persist -1 counter on something, and you want to be able to reactivate it, or you want to get rid of the Undying counter from that was given by a Machias, or maybe a Thing in the Ice, for example, that you want to remove those ice counters from it yourself. That's, I think, where this will have more of a home, where you have the ability to potentially manipulate this too.
Yep.
Like, this is a good removal spell. I don't know that you can unseat Go for the Throat in terms of 12,000 decks. Like, that is a big level to try and reach. But this is certainly interesting, and I like the type of decks that I think this will have a home for. Like, I'm definitely here for this one. I mean, but like, I'm also just completely flummoxed. I'm sorry, because Heartless Sister Act after the Sharknado. I can't. Oh my goodness. And the next spell that we're about to talk about is also a little bit campy too. So Matt, I'll hand it right back to you, and I'll just continue laughing.
Well, this is my favorite Red Hot Chili Peppers song. It is Colossification or Californication. It's one of those two. So Colossification is the card. It is 5 green for an enchantment aura. Enchant creature. When Colossification enters the battlefield, you tap enchanted creature. That seems bad. Enchanted creature gets +20/+20, which doesn't seem too bad.
I'm a little bothered that that there is an aura that gives more power than the Eldrazi conscription. But on that note, Sovereigns of Lost Alara, eat your heart out. Like, when you attack and then Sovereigns can find this aura for you, that's real good to just put into play on a creature that's already attacking. Like, +20, you can't ignore that. If you are playing, like, Dana, your Fling deck, for example, like, this is one of the biggest power boosts I've ever seen for you to line up a Fling or a Chandra's Ignition for.
Well, that was the comment I was going to make here is, as someone who has an Enchantress deck and a Fling deck, this would be legal in both. I'm not that into it in my Enchantress deck, where it's going to tap the creature that I would probably be swinging with, force me to wait a turn. Whereas my Fling deck, I don't care. I'm flinging the creature.
Right.
So like I'm looking for a spot in my Fling deck, and I was looking the other night to see if I wanted it in my Enchantress deck, and I just don't think I do.
I think that Tuvasa would enjoy it, because Tuvasa also has so many unblockable enchantments, and this makes Tuvasa lethal even if you're starting from square one, which is really great. But also Ukima, get your life. Ukima, the whale wolf that we discussed on our last episode, which deals damage if it leaves the battlefield equal to its power to another player. I'll put +20 on that one. Absolutely.
I mean, we have to keep in mind too, we're talking about a 7 mana enchantment. That's where I kind of lose my interest. Like, I love the attack step. I love combat damage. I love commander damage. And I, as the resident aggro player, I have not a whole lot of interest in this card. I think it's 7 mana for one effect that can get answered pretty quick. Unless you're cheating it in, I'm not sure how many people are going to want to play this fairly.
Well, I just want to point out that in one of the previous Commander precons, we got the enchantment Epic Proportions, which is a 6 mana +5/+5. And if you add just 1 more mana, apparently you also add 15/15, which is a little bit insane.
That is true.
There is, real quick, if you guys are all right with it, I want to talk about for a moment the Skull Prophet Golgari card here, just a 2 mana 3/1 that can tap to add a black or green, or it can tap to put 2 cards from the top of your library into your graveyard. I'm really here for this in a way that I didn't expect to be. Matt, you do have a Muldrotha deck.
I do.
Immediate slot in. Does this not quite make room? What do you think?
Well, so if it were a typical Muldrotha deck, I probably would consider it. Since mine is a +1/+1 counters deck, I am not going to put it in there just because it's a betrayal of theme. Dana's rubbing off on me in that sense. I think that being able to, it's mana when you need it, or it fills your graveyard when you need that as well. I think that there's enough versatility that it's probably fine. I'm not going to put it in mine, but I imagine, Joey, a lot of Golgari decks you might consider it for.
I think I play I do have a Marin deck, and Marin, nothing's bad in Marin is the problem. Like, Muldrotha and Marin are such powerful commanders that they're very crowded already, so it is probably a little bit tougher to find room for these necessarily, but it's still never going to underperform in those decks if you do find room for it. I think where I'm actually more interested in it is going to be like in a Sidisi deck, for example, which really enjoys having repeated sources of mill. Or also like a Hogak deck, for example, because you do need both creatures to allow you to cast the Hogak and a big graveyard to allow you to cast the Hogak. So,
we know the only people that are playing Hogak are also on the Commander Cookout podcast, so that's a whole 2 people.
Wow. I mean, that we know from the website that we work for that's not true. But I can see that you just really want a chance to talk about the amazing play that Ryan made with his Hogak deck, where he accidentally didn't realize that there was a Grafdigger's Cage in play and tried to reanimate stuff from his graveyard, and it didn't work. So we have forced that conversation into the podcast. No, I think this is perfectly good in Hogak. And it'll be a good role player in plenty of other decks too. But like this is a notable mana dork, a notable uncommon that I just kind of wanted to spend a moment on. There's also, Dana, I kind of want to pass these off to you because there's a suite of cards here that remind me of cards that I know that you don't like very much. But now they have cycling.
I mean, you probably shouldn't have been running Cancel and Explosive Vegetation already. But you definitely shouldn't be doing it now since we just got copies of those cards that have cycling. Neutralize and Migration Path are just Cancel and Explosive Vegetation that also have cycling too.
Yeah.
So you probably had better alternatives already, but you for sure do now. I don't think either of these are still good enough for Commander, although Migration Path is much more interesting, I think. I just feel like you very often are not going to want to cycle your counterspell in Commander.
Yeah.
Ramp is a little bit different, I think. I don't love 4-mana Ramp in general, but having the option to pitch it away on turn 8 when you definitely don't need it feels way better than having it just be in your hand and being like, well, I guess I could Ramp. So
yeah,
it's better than the alternative, I guess.
I mostly just wanted to give you the chance to say die, Cancel, die. But, there's another one that is a strict upgrade over the enchantment Coastal Piracy. We have the enchantment Reconnaissance mission now, which is the same text, but it also has cycling. I'm not sure if this is a replacement as much as a supplement to that kind of strategy where you're playing those and maybe Bident of Thassa if you have a bunch of little creatures. But these are definitely interesting. So yeah, look at the old cards that feel like they're Commander staples, but have a lot of different improvements. This is just one more signal to look at those. Our next one is an enchantment that I'm incredibly happy to see. This is Bastion of Remembrance, 3-mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. And whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. This is Zulaport Cutthroat on an enchantment, and this might be one of the cards I am actually most excited for in this set.
I mean, that kind of Blood Artist effect is always really, really strong in decks that tend to want to run it. The advantage, or the way to deal with it, I guess I should say, is when someone drops 2 of those, that's when you start looking at dropping your board wipe. Bastion Remembrance is going to fight through that. It's going to be a card that's difficult to remove for some decks, and it makes 1 piece of sack fodder there when it comes into play. So, I don't know. I think if I'm playing that style deck, I am absolutely probably finding a slot for this.
Yeah, I mean, one of the nice things about the other cards, the Zulaports in them, is that they are creatures that you can recur if you have any spells like that. But the fact that this is so much harder to get rid of really means that it slots into all the decks that we know that it wants to slot into. But I'm so excited for it. I have probably 3 different decks that this will go into, so I will not be shocked if this, among the uncommons, also launches itself into the high numbers. Because if I recall correctly, Zulaport Cutthroat shows up in over 20,000 decks.
That's a few.
So, there's precedent for this to this is going to succeed. We didn't want to spend too long talking about the cycling cards in this because those will mostly be relegated. The cycling payoff cards are going to be mostly relegated to the cycling dedicated decks, which is a fairly niche strategy. But there's one in particular, Matt, if you don't mind reading the Unpredictable Cyclone for us. This one is certainly notable because it's crazy.
Well, it is crazy because there's a million lines of text on it, but I will read it. It is, so Unpredictable Cyclone is the card. If you missed that, it is 3 red for an enchantment. If a cycling ability of another non-land card would cause you to draw a card, instead exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a card that shares a card type with the cycled card. You may cast that card without paying its mana costs, then put the exiled cards that weren't cast this way on the bottom of your library in a random order. This just screams chaos. It is unpredictable, to say the least.
Well, it also has a cycling ability of its own. You can cycle it away for 2 mana to just discard it, draw a card, and that is certainly crazy. And I don't know if I gave cycling as much respect in my head as I think it maybe deserves. And it wasn't until I saw this in particular that I'm like, oh yeah, this deck is absolutely going to be very real. This pairs extremely well with one of our preview cards, Herald of the Forgotten, because this has a cycling ability that the Herald can bring back. But the ability to turn cycling into a deck that is more than just I've discarded a card, I've drawn a card, and I'll get a bunch of triggers off of the fact that I discarded and drew a card, which is sort of where I was kind of like, oh yeah, that's cool, but it maybe isn't something we haven't already seen before. A lot of Wheels decks do that, and so I was kind of like, I don't know. This is the type of thing that really vaulted over the top for me, a really, really incredible cycling payoff. There are plenty of them in here. Cycling is going to absolutely be a real deck, but this one in particular just, I think, made the deck even more of its own unique thing that I'm very interested to see.
Well, and the interesting part is it's basically possibility storm whenever you cycle stuff for yourself. And it's nice because you're not going to accidentally let your opponents kind of oops their way into something extremely powerful. It's just stuff that you're doing, which is nice that it's limited in the fact that it's only getting triggered off of you and then what you control it. So instant speed as well is it's pretty nice.
So rounding things off for our review here, there are some planeswalkers. I'm not sure if I think that they're all too good here for Commander. They do look interesting, but I don't know. Matt, is there a planeswalker that you think might show up in Commander at any decent clip that we might see in high popularity on EDHREC? Anything stand out?
So the Vivien, Monsters Advocate, I know I'm putting in my Miri deck. I think that's a very powerful effect. The other two I'm not too keen on, other than Narset Ninja kicks higher than anything I've ever seen before. But I will read Vivien, Monsters Advocate. It's 3 green for a 3 starting loyalty Vivien. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast creature spells from the top of your library. Then you can put 1 loyalty count on her to create a 3/3 green beast creature token. Then put your choice of a vigilance counter, reach counter, or a trample counter on it. And then you can -2 Vivien. When you cast your next creature spell this turn, search your library for a creature card with lesser converted mana cost, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Even if you are getting the 1 -2 ability, but when you play Vivien, and then you get a smaller creature from your next big cast, that's a pretty powerful effect. I'm a big fan of it. You're kind of cascading, and the fact that you tutor, you can find some combo pieces, which I do play a few combos in Miri, so it's nice that I have that ability too. I'm a big fan of the flexibility. Creating tokens isn't ever a bad thing either, because if you're playing Craterhoof Behemoth, that's just more fuel.
Yeah, I really like this card a lot. I'm jamming it immediately into my Recce deck.
Okay.
It gives me that future sight effect for creatures, which the deck wants. I can then choose, okay, do I want to cast this off the top or draw it with by casting a card in hand to then possibly reveal another creature I can cast. It opens a lot of things up there. I can get a shuffle if I'm somehow locked by using the -2. When I cast a card in hand, it just does all the things I want to be doing in that deck. So I will be jamming it as soon as possible into that deck, and I would guess it's going to find a home in plenty of green decks that have a real deep creature density.
Yeah, if the card Vizier of the Menagerie is any indication, and this is another card that has a pretty similar effect, playing creatures off the top of your deck, that shows up in 6,000 decks. Most of the decks seem to fall along the lines of Nikia or like Rurik Thar, for example, which aren't going to like the Planeswalker version of this because they don't like non-creature spells. But maybe something like Animar, Soul of Elements, might also enjoy it because then you can churn through even more creatures, like you just mentioned that strategy. And also just, like you said, resetting the deck if you end up getting locked without a creature on top, or just also +1 to make some 3/3 beast tokens. That's pretty cool. The only thing that I request is that folks who have the bad habit of using dice instead of actual cardboard tokens to represent their beasts, it will be difficult to put dice on top of dice. So make sure that you have beast tokens for this particular one when you play it. And up finally, rounding everything off, we have some tri-lands. What, Dana, tell us about them.
These are insane. There's a cycle of 5 wedge-producing mana lands. The Triome sequence, what's most notable about these is they have 3 basic land types. So, for example, to use Rogran Triome, it's a land Island Mountain Plains, and it taps for all 3 colors, Jeskai mana, as well as having cycling 3 on the card, but that seems kind of irrelevant. I mean, maybe you'll cycle it once in a while, but for the most part, it's just going to be an ETB tapped tri-land. So a better version, a significantly better version, essentially, of the lands that we got back in Khans of Tarkir.
Yeah, because you can fetch these.
Yeah.
You can fetch these. You can Farseek for one of these. That's amazing. If the cycling ability gets used on these of like in any degree of for that just almost feels irrelevant to me is basically what I'm trying to say. Like, I don't think I'm going to cycle these. Maybe really, really, really late game if I have a bounce land to get this back to try and cycle away for 3, but 3's a lot. But like, yeah, the fact that you can fetch these are great. We know that these will be popular. Shock lands are among the most popular types of lands in the format. These are fantastic to fetch. This is a really great thing to see. I'm absolutely happy for these. I guess I don't know what else to say aside from that these will see tons of play.
Here's the thing. I will say this. if I was playing a wedge deck and I don't currently have one, I would run the one wedge land. But if I'm playing a 4-color deck or a 5-color deck, I'm not sure I want to have that many ETB tapped lands, even if they are fetchable in my deck. Maybe if I was on a super, super budget mana base and didn't even have things like shocks, I would maybe do it. But I just think having too many of these in one deck is really, really challenging. I'd be fine having one. I don't think I'd be cool having more than that.
Yeah, and I think the price tags that I'm seeing on these ones are also a little bit high. So you can totally play a Tri-Land and you'll be perfectly fine. If you just want to play a Sansept Citadel instead of a Triome, that's always going to be perfectly okay. But it is cool to have these. If it was going to happen anywhere, it was definitely going to be this wedge-dedicated set. And I'm happy to see this type of addition. I think this is a cool expansion into the lands that we have. So that was like finishing off a whole big meal. That was a whole bunch of cards to go through. We talked about the companions on a different episode, and we talked about the Commander products already. Guys, where are you at? Final impressions on Ikoria?
I like cards. I think some of the overall themes of the set, they're just not for me. I'm not a massive, let's see how just big and Timmy-ish we can get. When that's fine. But there are enough cards in here that I am interested. That I'm probably adding at least a card or two to every one of my decks. I can pretty confidently say that.
I'm surprised that you're not more hyped for it, because I remember that you were much more hyped for the Commander product. Compared to the Commander product, where does this lie?
Sure. Compared to the... So every one of the legends in the Commander products, I could see people building decks around. There are a lot of legends here that I can't. And I think that all of your 3-color mythics, people aren't probably going to be building decks around Brokos, like we pointed out, or Snapdax. And that kind of, granted, not every card's for Commander, especially in a standard legal set. I understand that. And I'm fine with that. I think that there need to be plants for standard formats in standard sets. So I think overall I might be more excited for the pre-cons, but both of them have cards that I want to put in a lot of decks. I want to put Luminous Broodmoth into Miri. I want to put Riel, in my Niv Mizzet deck. So they're all my decks are getting some sort of an upgrade from this set. I'm excited for a bunch of individual cards, but the flavor to the set, it's not for me. The Toho alternate art named cards, that really lost me. So I think I'm torn on the set. I like enough cards in here. I'm glad it's out. But just overall, the set is doing a few things flavor-wise that just, it's not for me. And that's fine.
Yeah, like I've made no secret of the fact that I feel like this is too close to silver bordered Magic for my particular comfort.
Right.
There are in fact literal versions of silver bordered cards that are now just black bordered, and it just seems all at once. And we had Charlotte Sable, member of the CAG, on a stream a few weeks back. She mentioned that her word for this set would be ambitious, which I think is a perfect description for it too. But with that said, I am actually more excited about this set than I am about the Commander precons, which I think is very strange, and I did not expect myself to be. But I look through the set and I see a bunch of stuff that I'm going to do. Maybe it's because I play more multicolored, as in like tricolored decks than you guys tend to. But this is a total feast for players like us. And especially, the commander that I think is going to benefit most from all of these is Skullbriar, because he maintains his counters even if he goes back to the command zone. So he can make use of these keyword counters in such good spirits. This is absolutely crazy, ridiculous in terms of what you're able to do here. Dana, where are you falling?
6 of one, half dozen of the other. I don't know if I like it as much as the Commander product itself. But also, like, some of the things I don't love about it aren't really the set's fault. By virtue of being a 3-color set, or at least leaning heavily into 3 colors, that just makes a bunch of cards unplayable unless you're playing 3-color or 4-color decks. I don't know how you would avoid that. You can't avoid that. It's just the way the math works out, but you wind up with a bunch of cards. If this was a set leaning into 1 or 2 colors, well, then there's a lot more decks those cards can go into. And instead I'm looking at these going, well, if I play this 1 Mardu deck, then I can run this 1 Mardu card versus a Boros card that can be ran in 3 different tricolor decks, etc. So that always kind of makes the set feel a little bad to me, just because you're limited in where you can run the cards. But that's also not a reason not to do 3-color sets. I like a 3-color set in theory a lot. So that just always kind of holds me back from loving anything 3-color too much. I didn't like the Tarkir block for that reason. So that's probably just me.
And see, Dark Year is one of my absolute favorite sets because of what it was able to usher in. I think that this is going to have just as much impact, even if some of the flavor of the set is kind of like, okay, this is a lot to take in all at once. Just browsing through the most popular commanders, we see so many cards for so many of the 3-color commanders. Like, there's a lot going on. This will absolutely make an impact for sure. Sharknado.
Sharknado, Heartless Sister Act.
Good Lord, that was ridiculous. Like, what's up next? Battlefield Earthcraft? Like, anyway, I think we need to be done. I also think that we need to wrap up this show. Remember, we will be doing an episode on the companions as a separate thing here. Our thoughts on them, both as companions and as commanders, because there are some really crazy things happening with them too. This is the type of set that is absolutely going to make a huge impact, I think. And so it is exciting times, and we'll definitely see what they wreak up on the commander world as soon as they do come out. But for now, let's just call this episode to a close. Thank you guys so much for joining me. And if any of our listeners would like to get in touch with us, where can they find you all? Matt?
You can find me, as always, at Mathimus55 on Twitter, and also find my stream on Twitch.
And Dana?
You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach, and you can hear me on my other podcast a couple times a week, CMDR Central.
And I'm Joey Schultz. You can find me at Joseph M. Schultz on Twitter, and you can find the cast at EDHRECast on Facebook and on Twitter. If you have a question, a keen insight to EDHREC's data, or a challenge to stats pick that you think we should know about, you can contact us at edhrecast@gmail.com. Our thanks again to Josh the Kwai and the whole team at the Command Zone for handling post-production work on the podcast, and to our sponsors, TCG Player and CardKingdom.com. Again, we're not entirely sure where their operations will be when this episode goes out, but once things settle, they are seriously, seriously great. You can find them using the price info links on EDHREC or by visiting cardkingdom.com/EDHREC. And that shows your support for the show. Listeners, we would love to hear your thoughts on Ikoria and the Commander Precons, all these things that are going on. Which commanders are your favorite? We've got just a little bit of data coming in at the time of recording that shows that Zaxara and Riel are the most popular so far, but we'll see where things land when these episodes actually air. Let us know your thoughts on Ikoria. We're really excited to hear what everyone thinks about it. We'll be back at you next week with more data and insights. But until then, remember, EDHREC your deck before you wreck your deck.